Nothing draws more attention than the moment when the system itself begins to crumble before our eyes. And that is exactly what is happening now inside American courts. What we have witnessed recently was not just a procedural failure, but an explicit portrait of the institutional decay of a government that has lost any sense of order, morality, and responsibility. When a politically appointed prosecutor doesn't even know what she signed, and a federal judge has to ask aloud, "What is this?" we are witnessing the collapse of a state that no longer respects its own laws. This embarrassing scene, a prosecutor completely lost before a bewildered judge, is not an isolated detail. It is a symptom of something much deeper, a system that has been captured, manipulated, and turned into a political weapon. The desperate attempt to prosecute James Comey, the former FBI director, shows just how corrupted American justice has become by power and vengeance. And the most terrifying part, all of this is being done under the command of people who treat the judicial system as a personal plaything, an instrument of persecution. The incompetence that's spilled over in this courtroom is jaw-dropping. Imagine two different documents, both supposedly official, with conflicting charges, questionable signatures, and a judge who doesn't know which one is real. This is the true portrait of an administration that thrives on chaos, prospers on improvisation, and seems willing to tear up any rule to control the narrative. Nothing there seems professional, nothing seems legitimate. It looks like theatre, and bad theatre at that. Prosecutor Lindsay Halligan was supposed to represent the seriousness of the Department of Justice. Instead, she starred in a series of blunders worthy of a legal comedy script. She didn't know what she had signed, didn't know how many charges existed, and couldn't explain to the judge what was happening. What should have been a solemn act, the presentation of a criminal charge, turned into a spectacle of amateurism that shames any citizen who still believes in the rule of law. But the real problem isn't just the lack of competence, it's the intention behind it. Because when the judicial system begins to act out of vengeance, the error is no longer human. It becomes political. This prosecutor was placed there for a purpose, to persecute the regime's enemies, turn political rivals into defendants, and give an appearance of legality to what is in practice pure authoritarianism. The idea is simple: weaken, intimidate, and silence those who dare to challenge power. What is at stake is far more than a case against James Comey. It is the very credibility of American justice. When a government allows its legal machinery to become a tool of manipulation, it loses the right to call itself democratic. What should be a system of checks and balances becomes a mechanism of moral destruction. And with each new scandal, the trust of the ordinary citizen dissolves, little by little, until only cynicism and fear remain. This is exactly what we are seeing now. A government that hides behind speeches of legality but operates in the shadows with the same practices it has always condemned. The difference is that this time it is all happening in broad daylight, and the whole world is watching. The collapse is no longer a hypothesis, it is a fact. American justice, once a symbol of strength and balance, has become the stage for an unprecedented political farce. Who would have thought that the world's greatest power would become the clearest example of how the law can be distorted when it falls into the wrong hands? Today, what we see is a government that trades principles for convenience and justice for vengeance. And what was once an exception now seems to be the rule. When a justice system becomes a stage for amateurs and political puppets, the result is what we saw in this case: a directionless court, a confused judge, and a prosecutor unable to distinguish what she signed. This scene is not just a procedural error, it is a portrait of a government that has completely lost control of its institutions and replaced competence with blind loyalty. And for any nation, this is the harbinger of collapse. By failing to explain the charges, Prosecutor Lindsay Halligan exposed something that the most attentive Americans had already noticed for some time: the infiltration of political agents within the Department of Justice itself. This practice, using legal power to persecute enemies and protect allies, is the kind of distortion that destroys the foundation of democracy. The government has turned the court into a political arena, and the law into a weapon. The judge, bewildered, did what any sensible person would do. He questioned, but the mere fact that he had to ask, "What is this?" shows the depth of the abyss we have fallen into. It's not just incompetence, it's institutional disorganization, deliberately provoked by those who prefer chaos to transparency. It's the old political trick: confuse, misinform, and in the midst of the mess, do whatever you want. Meanwhile, the press allied with the government pretends nothing happened. No major newspaper asks the obvious question: how can a prosecutor, appointed through political connections, not know how many charges are at stake? How can the system allow such a sensitive case against a former FBI director to be conducted with such amateurism? The answer is simple, though uncomfortable, because the intention was never to deliver justice, but to create headlines, feed narratives, and destroy reputations. This is the hallmark of modern authoritarianism. It doesn't need tanks, it only needs obedient prosecutors and intimidated judges. The destruction is silent, bureaucratic, and covered with a veneer of legality. The hearings take place, the papers are stamped, and the press says justice is being served. But the ordinary citizen, the one who lives outside the corridors of power, sees the truth. The system has been hijacked. The most serious consequence is that by acting this way, the government undermines public trust in the state itself. When the citizen realizes that the rules apply to some but not to others, that judicial decisions depend more on political affiliation than on evidence, they stop believing in the law. And when faith in the law disappears, what remains is resentment, discouragement, and fear. It is in this moral void that authoritarian regimes flourish, and this is precisely the ground being prepared. And it's not just an American problem. The whole world is watching this spectacle closely. When the planet's greatest power sets the example that the rule of law can be bent to the ruler's will, a dangerous door opens. Governments in other nations watch and learn. If the US does this, why can't we? Moral decay spreads like a virus, and history shows that when an empire begins to corrode from within, the rest of the world feels the consequences. It is no exaggeration to say that this case symbolizes the bankruptcy of a model. Justice, which should be the last bastion of balance, has become a stage for political disputes. The prosecutor, who should represent the seriousness of the state, has become a symbol of its moral failure. The judge, lost between contradictory documents, has become a metaphor for a country that no longer knows right from wrong. And the most ironic part is that, even amid such confusion, the government insists that everything is under control. The arrogance with which they treat their own mistakes is a reminder of how power can corrupt. There is no humility, no transparency, no accountability. There is only the desire to punish enemies and protect allies. The Comey case is more than a legal dispute. It is a mirror of an era in which justice has become a spectacle and the court a political stage. And while the country watches in a mix of outrage and disbelief, the government continues to smile. Because for them, the more confusion, the better. In chaos, the truth is lost, and power is perpetuated. What we saw in this American courtroom was not just a bureaucratic error. It was a public exposure of the moral bankruptcy of a system that has rotted from within. The image of a lost prosecutor, unaware of what she signed, and a confused judge trying to understand what was happening, is the portrait of a country that has lost its way. And all of this is happening under a government that boasts of defending democracy, but acts with the most authoritarian and petty methods possible. It is impossible to look at this case and not see the pattern. The state machinery, which once served the law, now serves power. Justice, which was once the guardian of the Constitution, has become an instrument to punish those who dare to question the system. The government, instead of governing for the people, governs for itself, based on resentment, vengeance, and manipulation. And when vengeance becomes state policy, justice ceases to exist. What is frightening is not just the incompetence, but the impunity. No one responsible for this legal mess will be punished. No oversight body will raise its voice. No traditional newspaper will make it a headline. And why? Because they are all part of the same machine. One protects the other. One silences the other. It is the old survival tactic of political elites. Keep the people distracted while the system rots. The legal collapse we witnessed in this case is just the surface of a deeper problem, the erosion of trust. Trust in justice, in the press, and in the government itself. When the citizen realizes that the court has become a stage for personal interests, they withdraw from politics, stop participating, and lose hope. And that is exactly what power wants: a tired, apathetic, and silent people. But silence is dangerous, because silence legitimizes. When the citizen stops reacting, power advances. When society becomes accustomed to the absurd becomes the norm. The court that today confuses documents is the same one that tomorrow may ignore evidence, distort testimonies, and convict the innocent, all in the name of a fabricated order. What happened to James Comey is a warning to all who still believe that the system is fair, that institutions are solid, and that the state always acts within the law. It does not. When political power decides to interfere with justice, the result is this: chaos, contradiction, and the destruction of public credibility. And once that credibility is lost, it is not easily rebuilt. Those who applaud this persecution should remember that power changes hands. Today it is with one group, tomorrow with another. And the same instrument used to punish an enemy can, in the future, be used against those who defend it now. History is merciless to those who think they can manipulate justice without consequences. Every regime that began by persecuting adversaries ended up collapsing under the weight of its own hypocrisy. Meanwhile, the nation's real problems remain untouched: rising inflation, spreading insecurity, unemployment tormenting families, and corruption renewing itself every day. But none of this receives the same attention. The focus is on manufacturing narratives, turning the court into a stage and justice into a spectacle. Let the people suffer, as long as power remains concentrated in the right hands. The Comey case will be remembered as one of the most shameful chapters in American judicial history, and not just because of a prosecutor's incompetence, but because of the cowardice of an entire system that chose to kneel before political power. When the rule of law bows to the will of rulers, democracy dies, and it dies slowly, to the applause of those who should have defended it. The future will exact a high price for this complicity, because every unjust decision, every manipulation, every omission adds to the bill that history inevitably presents. And when the time comes to pay, there will be no more excuses, no speeches, no promises that can erase what has been done. The truth is simple. A government that uses the law to persecute its opponents is no longer a legitimate government. It is a regime, and regimes, as history shows, always end the same way: defeated, discredited, and condemned by their own arrogance. This is the price of turning justice into a weapon, and the whole world is watching.